Hello everyone, welcome to Code and Learn. I was recently asked by one of my subscribers to share my take on this Reddit post. The title of the Reddit post is Go Nil Panic and the $1 billion Mistake. So I will be discussing if Go is to blame for this fiasco. Some other channels have already made reaction videos on this topic, but I haven't watched them or read comments on the original Reddit post as I don't want to form an opinion based solely on popular views. Instead, I will discuss this from my experience working with Go in production environments. So, a little background on this Reddit post. So, this Reddit post is about a company that had multiple development teams using Kotlin for most of their production application. An individual with experience in Go pushed to introduce Go to other teams. This is the same individual who posted this. Some teams followed suit and started writing the microservices in Go. One such team was responsible for a service used for subscription plans. They implemented the subscription service in Go. So basically, the subscription service is responsible for user subscriptions. Let us now go over the architecture from a higher level. So you have this subscription service that would load subscription from database into the memories or a memory cache, something like Redis on startup, and then refresh it after every few minutes. Other services in this microservices architecture would call this service with a user ID, and then the subscription service would respond with subscription plan that the user has subscribed to. So that's basically the overall architecture of our service. Now, what exactly happened? A new subscription plan that the company was going to launch was added to the database. Some fields of these records were left null in the database. So basically, they were nullable columns. A visibility flag used to determine if the subscription plan should be visible to the user or not was set to false for obvious reasons, as the company would have wanted to test it before launching the subscription plan. As the launch day approached, the team responsible for the subscription service did a few tests and everything seemed to be working fine. Since everything was working fine, on the launch day the visible flag was set to true for the new subscription plan. And then what happened next is every developer's nightmare. The entire production system dependent on the subscription service went down. They noticed as soon as the plan was loaded into the service pods started crashing and the system went down. Engineers were paged and the support team was confused as to what was happening. They were probably receiving a ton of support tickets from their users. When engineers investigate, the first thing we do is to check if anything new was committed that could have caused this, because it's really easy to revert back a commit, but nothing new was committed to the service that would explain the error. In the end, it took the team a few hours to recover. It was really bad for the company. So what exactly caused this to happen? The Reddit post mentions that in the app the code developers used a struct to deserialize the data from the database, which is very common for us to do. And then pointers were used for null fields in the database, as in Go code pointers can be used to indicate the absence of any value. So they chose to stick with pointers to indicate if the database field was null or not. The app would then transform this database structure into API structure to send an API response after fetching the data from the database. They found that this is when the API structure tried to access field that was nil on the database structure, causing a runtime panic for nil pointer exception. Looking at this, the Kotlin developers in the company argued that such an issue wouldn't happen in Kotlin or any JVM app. Kotlin's explicit null handling prevents accidental null dereferences. Even if a null pointer exception occurs in the background thread, only that thread is killed, not the entire app. Additionally, it was argued that the error recovery mechanism are often built into the background task handling. So basically, the Kotlin or the Java developers were trying to say that if the app was written in Java or Kotlin, this would have never happened. So what do I think about all this? In my opinion, when production systems encounter any issues, there are two aspects to consider, the human aspect and the technical aspect. Let's begin by discussing the human aspect. Although we may not have all the details and can only speculate, there are some things we can learn from this situation. Even though there is no one to answer, my first question would be, how did it get so far without no one ever catching it? Production code usually have unit tests, which tests each piece of code in isolation, while integration tests help test functionality with services like testing with a database. On top of that, many teams would use end-to-end testing. Even after that, there are dev and canary environments in most companies which replicate production environment for testing purposes. So, we use that environment for testing before we launch a feature into production. Assuming all this was in place, the bug was never caught. This feels to me like there are some human problem in this organization. So whenever you commit a code, you get peer reviews. How did senior developers miss this? Was it tested in the developer environment? Was it tested end to end? These questions can only be answered by the poster, which fortunately or unfortunately is anonymous. But from the look of it, I'm inclined to say it wasn't tested enough. If you read the Reddit post, it will come to light that teams were proficient in Kotlin Java, but they were currently transitioning to Go. Considering this, it may have been beneficial to allow more time for engineers to fully understand the intricacies of Go. Typically, when a new language is introduced to a team, a senior engineer with extensive experience in that language would oversee a project of this magnitude and guide the team on best practices. I have a feeling that teams were not yet prepared to switch to Go, or perhaps Go was not needed at all in this org. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Go and would highly recommend it. But in engineering, particularly in software engineering, everything is about trade-offs. It's all about what you're gaining versus what you're losing. No language is inherently good or bad, and every language has its own set of drawbacks, whether it's Kotlin, Java, Go, Rust, or any other language that you want to pick. Engineering decisions should be made with an open mind and not just for the sake of one's personal preferences. Now, let's get to the technical factors, or to our main point, if Go is to blame for this. When it comes to technical factors, it's worth noting that nil checks are frequently used in production level Go code, especially when pointers are used to indicate the absence of a value. In fact, I have previously mentioned this in the pointer tutorial. So how did the team miss this? Perhaps it was due to poor coding practices or lack of experience, as we talked earlier. But we can't be certain just looking at the Reddit post. From the side of Go, I would say in Go programming language, there are packages that are available to prevent such errors. For instance, the standard lib SQL package provides null strings, null int, null floats that can be utilized to manage cases where values are absent or for null fields in the database. This eliminates the need to use pointers to indicate the lack of value for database records. These types are very frequently used. By checking the valid field, you can easily determine if the field value was null in the database. In Go, it is recommended to use clear and verbose code over short, complex code. From my personal experience with Go, when I implement a service which is dependent on a database, I usually prefer to write a wrapper over the database functionality even when using a ORM. This helps me test it end to end with an actual database using test containers, which you can easily run locally without the need to set up a database server on your local machine. I like to understand the expected behavior, especially for edge cases. Even though you have package documentation for this, sometimes there are cases that are not listed in the package documentation. So, just to be sure, I like to test each and every functionality of the database. Usually, I would recommend this for all services, but sometimes it could be hard to maintain multiple level test cases, as even tests are code that needs to be maintained. But for services of this nature, that is production critical applications, I would definitely recommend it or even force it if I have to. So what can we conclude from this? Personally, I in no way think that Go is to blame for this. I understand that Go team could make some of these things better, but it is up to the developers to understand the pitfalls of any technology or language before using them. You can pick any language you want and pick out n number of shortcomings from it. Nothing is perfect. The problem in my opinion happened because of mix of few things. First is the lack of experience in Go when it came to the teams. The original poster was experienced with Go, but teams need to be brought up to the level when they are comfortable programming production services in new language. Personally, I think engineers should specialize in specific area of knowledge or on the depth of knowledge. Depth of knowledge is how much you know about a particular thing, while breadth of knowledge which is a necessity of architect role, is how many things you know about all the different technologies around you. Enough to compare them, or at least compare their trade-offs. So I hope you learned something important from it. I would love to discuss this with you, so feel free to leave a comment under the video or reach out to our Discord server. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy coding.